My name is Tracy Hawkins. I live in Durham, North Carolina. So excited to see people put in their areas in the chat. Hello, everyone. As I said, Durham, North Carolina, mother to two autistic boys, ages 9 and 11. A fierce and passionate parent advocate, and really excited to be here.
I'm Adrienne Kirschner. I actually work at Red, Wine, and Blue. I'm the head of engagement, and I'm also the parent of two neurodivergent kids, two teenagers, one who is autistic and one who is ADHD, which if you're not familiar with it, that means like that combination of autism and ADHD. And in addition to that, I'm also autistic. I'm what you would call late diagnosed autistic because when I was a kid, they didn't really think girls could be autistic. So I was diagnosed much later in life. So a lot of what I focus on in more recent years with my advocacy work is support for women and girls.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Chelsea Potts. I run a page called Divergent Hood online that focuses on late diagnosed autistic people, but also identity development as a whole. I found out that I was autistic when I was post 30, when my daughter found out that she was autistic, and I said, dang, we do act alike. Oh, oh, I do that too. Oh. And I said, okay, let me ask, do you think it's worth getting tested? And her psychiatrist said, after meeting with you a few times, I would say so. So I said, all right, let's go ahead and get this done. So from that, I just started a TikTok channel. I began talking about my experiences. But what I noticed was that so many of us were getting lost in who we were, especially post-diagnosis, especially when you get that hit of like, I've always known I was different, but now I know why, and now I don't know what to do. So that's what my platform's focused on, and I'm really excited to be with you all today.
I'm Dr. Sarah Rodricks. I am a late identified neurodivergent mom, which I think is probably the theme with our kids, of 3 children, one of whom is an ADHDer as well. So again, just if folks didn't hear that, that is the combination of autism and ADHD. I run a small-ish nonprofit organization in Fall River, Massachusetts, that focuses on the intersection of neurodivergent folks, so autism or ADHDers, in addition to mental health. I'm a clinician by trade. We have mental health clinicians and clinical social workers that provide neuroaffirming support for our community of all ages. So that's the short version. I teach, I do, I've never met a social worker with one job, so here we are.
Great. Well, let's get started with questions. Tracy, what do you wish more people understood right away about autism and autistic people's lives?
I love that we're having this panel tonight, but I would say we have to always keep in mind that autism is not a soundbite. I love how it is in the news and it's getting a lot of attention, but autism affects the lives of individuals and families 365, right? And it is not just a diagnosis that affects children, it is the lifespan. I think a lot of times we kind of forget about kids matriculating, and then I always talk to self-advocates and parents, and they talk about that cliff, right? That after they graduate from high school, what happens? And I think as many people are on this call, it really is one of those things to start thinking about how could you continue to give to the community, right? How could you play your role in supporting and participating to kind of dispel the myths, move the needle? What can you do? As simple as starting a BRG group within your office, right? Your workplace. Inclusive hiring practices, looking at the hiring practices at your job. If you're thinking at your child's school, even if you do not have autistic or neurodivergent kids, but maybe you have a friend and you're wanting to learn more. Oh, I'm sorry, a BRG, a business resource group. A lot of those kind of single niche groups that a lot of companies have. A lot of companies are now starting to do ones for autistic and neurodivergent communities. So you can really understand the needs of the people that work within that company to make sure that they are providing resources and support for the community. But for schools like PTA and school events, how can you make sure that those are inclusive for all kids, right? The number of times I've been to school events, and they're not really taking into consideration the needs of all kids. And then community and places of worship, right? How can we make these places and these areas more inclusive? So I would say just really thinking about the diagnosis and what you can do to play your part to really support the community.
Sarah, there's a lot of misinformation about autism, from outdated stereotypes to outright dangerous myths. What are some of the most harmful misconceptions you encounter, and how do they affect autistic people day to day?
So I've got a handy list of my top 5. My first one is that autism really only affects kids because, just like Tracy was talking about, our kids ultimately become adults. And at that 18 to 22 range, right, there go the supports, there go the resources that are available for our individuals. So people don't grow out of autism, they do grow up though. And so we've got to be really prepared to support our community. And what not recognizing that means that there's less research, there's less funding, there are fewer supports in place, and it really erases the experience of autistic adults, right? Autistic adults that speak about it are usually considered not autistic enough because they can talk about their experience in this way. So there's that, right? There's also this idea that autistic folks lack empathy or that they don't have theory of mind. So it's this idea that other people also have their own thoughts and beliefs, and there's a lot of misconception about that. But the reality is that empathy, along with everything else, exists on a spectrum, and people can demonstrate different types of empathy. So just because one person might lean into one type of empathy does not mean they don't have the capacity for empathy in general. So this really leads to a lot of exclusion. It leads to bullying. It leads to misinformed clinical interventions for folks, right? We make these assumptions about people. We have these ideas about who can be autistic. At first, it was just white boys, right? Autism was a white boy diagnosis, and we've missed the girls. We've missed the girls that became women. We've missed our LGBT non-binary folks. We've missed our Black and brown kids, right? So all of those misdiagnoses have really turned into the invalidation of real experiences for folks, and it reduces access to much needed resources, care, and support right from the beginning. And I know we're going to talk about this, but there's this whole other idea around how autism is something that needs to be cured or it needs to be fixed. Again, it's not a disease. I wear that on my t-shirt for a reason. Parents are fed this very much tragedy-laden narrative at the point of identification for their children about what their kids are or are not going to be able to do in the future. I've got 3 of them. Nobody told me that my oldest son wasn't going to be able to speak and have friends or have any kind of romantic relationships in life, but they certainly said that about my middle one, right? And the difference is one is autistic and the other is not. It really justifies, when we kind of feed into that curative narrative, it justifies these abusive treatments that folks play into, sort of the fad of the year. It fuels all this self-stigma. And I think one of the things that people don't realize is that our autistic population, especially our folks that do not have a co-occurring intellectual disability and those that use verbal speech to communicate, have one of the highest suicidality rates among all populations. And so when we start talking about the need for cures and brokenness, it just fuels anxiety, depression, and suicidality. So we got to be really careful about that. I won't get into causes, but that's my other myth. There's no one single cause, just like there's no one single support. And so we've got to be really careful about those conversations because it really does feed these dangerous interventions that don't have scientific evidence behind them. And it again fuels that shame and stigma and guilt for families.
Let's talk about RFK Jr. and the policies that he's pushing. As HHS secretary, he continues to falsely claim that vaccines cause autism, even though that has been thoroughly debunked. And now we have the claim that acetaminophen causes autism with no valid scientific evidence to support it. Why is it so dangerous to keep repeating these lies, and how does it harm or impact, families and folks like yourself?
It's dangerous because these claims, they don't just live on the internet or within a press conference or within, the TV or radio or wherever you hear that. They they have the power to change the way people see autistic people and families like mine. Um, when our leaders repeat these like falsehoods, it shifts the conversation away from what actually matters, like making sure that autistic people have access to healthcare, communication support, safe housing, education, um, instead of putting resources into quality of life. Like we end up chasing these like imaginary causes. Um, for me as a parent, it means that I'm like kind of carrying this double weight. It's like I'm raising and loving my children, as they are, while also fighting against this constant stream of misinformation that tells the world that they're tragedies, that their existence is something to be feared or prevented. Um, and this is a stigma that trickles down into your classrooms, your doctor's offices, how your neighbors look at you. Um, and my children, they're not cautionary tales. They're like, but when lies like this circulate, that's exactly like how they're treated. And even going beyond my family, it's like this damages, public health for everyone. So if people are beginning to stop trusting vaccines or even basic medications because they've been tied to autism, um, then you'll have preventable diseases spreading again. Communities will suffer. But autism is not caused by vaccines or Tylenol. It's a natural and important part of human diversity. And the harm comes when we keep treating it as a problem to solve instead of seeing autistic people as worthy of support and dignity and investment.
It's so dangerous when we continue to spread this rhetoric, right, that we are broken or that we need to be fixed. Or when people say, oh, here, I got it. Here's how we fix it. I'm not broken, right? We are not broken people. And even I think something that was even more harmful that he said was when he said, I have not, this was RFK Jr., let me be very, very specific. A few months ago, he said, I do not know any adults who are autistic. I have not seen them. Where are they? They don't exist. And I'm looking at myself and I'm looking at my kids and I'm looking at my community and I'm like, we are right here. But what has happened is that we get swept under the rug. We have to accommodate ourselves. We have to learn how to manage our lives. But we do have lives and we do have families, and we are not an anomaly that needs to be erased. And I'll get more into it when we get to the next question, but it's just so dangerous. And it gets to a certain point where I get tired. I mean, I've told my community at large, I said, when we listen to stupidity, and I'm sorry, I'm going to call stupidity stupidity. When we entertain stupidity, we are taking energy away from our families, from ourselves, from our communities to actually spread good information. I will not give my attention to someone who is purposefully spreading ignorance. I won't do it. So when people say, do you want to speak about this? I am not entertaining anyone that wants to suppress my identity and the people that deal with these things, identities, to the point where they're willing to lie and push things. I won't entertain it, and you shouldn't either. We really have to be very attentive about our energy because most neurodivergent people, we have a limited amount of it, right? So we have to be careful, and we can't afford that, especially at times like this.
I actually wanted to, like, as Tiffany and Dr. C were talking, there was some comments in the chat, and I just wanted to add on to what Dr. C was saying because um, there's this misperception that autism is just like this linear line and you're like somewhere on the line. And I don't know if other people have seen it. We can maybe drop an image in the chat, but like the color wheel representation, where like it's like a pie chart almost, where there's all the different like aspects of autism and how every single one of us, even every single person on this call right now with autism, like how much one of those little slices of the pie, like whether it's like your rigidity or your sensory issues or your communication challenges, like all of us have different levels or capacities in all of those different areas. And so it's not really this linear line where it's like more or less autistic. It's like all of these different traits where we may be more or less autistic. And so it's much more complex than just thinking of it along this single line. And it can vary from day to day. So like when we're showing up on this call and we're looking like we are the most high functioning of or low support needs of autistic people, keep in mind that you don't see what happens off screen. Like you don't know what we had to do to conserve our energy to be able to be on here tonight and how much recovery time we might need after and the additional support we might need after. So it's just something to keep in mind as we're here together tonight.
Some people talk about autism as something to cure, and I think that you all started talking about this, but many autistic people reject that framing, and many people say that autism is an essential part of their identity. So I know you started talking about that, and you wanted to expand on it.
So like Dr. Sarah Sher says, right? Autism is not a disease. You can't cure it. And if you begin to think about how you can eradicate it, well, then you're thinking about how you can eradicate autistic people.
Mm.
And that's where things get very dangerous because we are going to continue to exist. We have existed before Tylenol, right? When I saw that chart, I was mind blown. I said, well, look at that. Autism was actually discovered before Tylenol was even invented. So there is this idea, right, that we have to be fixed, or that, oh, if you just go and do this, then things will be better. If you just put your mask on, then things will be better. But at the end of the day, that's still a mask, right? And we have to pay for that with our energy, with our time, with disingenuous connections with other people that have only known us to be a person that we feel like we have to because we're trying to simply survive. So I think that it's dangerous, right? Because it's not a disease. The second part of this, and this is something I've been grappling with, the idea of identity, right? And the autistic identity and what that really means. Being autistic does serve as a sense of community, especially when you can name your experiences. So, for a lot of people that have been trying to find their place in the world for so many years, knowing that they're different, but don't know why, knowing that, okay, I am autistic. This does make sense. It gives a sense of validation for people that will reject your experiences just because they don't understand them. It gives people space and place. But where identity can get a little dangerous is when we only consider that one identity, right? Because if we look at a social identity wheel, there is between 8 to 12 different identities. When you only focus on one, then you flatten us, right? And then people feel like, oh, this is all I am, or I can't do this because of this, or I have to do it this way because of that. And in some cases, that can be true, but you have to consider all of who you are, right? Your race, your gender, your religious beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, like you are a whole person. And I think that we have gotten away from seeing ourselves and the world seeing us as whole people. Like I'm not just autistic, I am a whole lot of things. And even as you look on this call and you see the panelists, none of us look alike, right? But we've all mentioned some connection to autism. But if you get us in a private conversation, I guarantee you we can have different conversations about multiple different things that have nothing to do with autism, right? Now, I don't know, my delayed processing will show up in every conversation, but that's neither here nor there. But there's more to me than that. So I think that when we start talking about it being an essential part, yes, it does provide understanding, especially if you're late diagnosed, but we are bigger than just people with autism or autistic people. We are whole humans that deserve to be seen as such.
So I see a lot of comments in the chat, questions about, well, what about people on the so-called other end of the spectrum, right? There's some discussion about what this looks like. So folks that are non-speaking, folks that are nonverbal, folks with intellectual disabilities are also whole human beings as well, right? That also deserve that dignity and respect and autonomy to help be able to make decisions for themselves. And so when we have this conversation about our identity, that is also an important part of their identity, but it's something that we need to recognize that there are multiple ways to be human in the world, and there's multiple ways to experience the world, right? So these are really important things to keep in mind when we start talking about, well, what about this group of people? No one's leaving out any group of people, right? What's important is that we're bringing everyone into that conversation and understanding that this is not something to be cured. Can we support things that are co-occurring? Gastrointestinal issues, speech language disorders, motor planning issues. Absolutely. Those are things that we want and need to support. But to say that we need to sort of eradicate this idea of autism, then what you're talking about is exactly what Dr. Chelsea had said, is that we're talking about eradicating an entire group of people. And I don't know how you all feel about that, but my answer to that is a hard no, right? Tiffany's son deserves every part of the world just as my son deserves every part of the world, right? Like, this is just like Tracy's kids deserve every part of the world. This is our reality. And so when we start talking about these things, we have to be really reflective and understand that we are talking about everyone, not just one type of autistic person.
What does true inclusion and support for autistic people look like? Because, Dr. Sarah was just mentioning that this is about everyone. So what does that look like in schools and workplaces, communities? How can allies help push back and make sure that everyone is included?
For me, I think it really starts with just learning and listening. It's really easy to erase and otherize people if you don't actually even understand anything about them. So the first step is always going to be learning. Follow people like Dr. C and Tiffany online. Sarah, I think you're also, I can't remember, everyone has like a largest like presence online. Like you two were like two of the first people I started following when I started like wanting to learn more about like what was happening with me and like trying to understand my own experience. So definitely follow people online. Read books about autism. I really encourage you to read books that are written by actual autistic people. Like one I thought was really amazing is The Canary Code. I actually have it right here. I can hold it up. It's by Ludmila Preslova. She is autistic and she also like writes about inclusion. She focuses primarily on the workplace, but I think a lot of what she says applies to communities. It applies to your family. It applies to home. And it's really just about educating yourself, learning, like if we're just talking about autism, like learning what the autistic experience is, and listening and asking questions. One of the things that I think, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but a big challenge for me and a lot of autistic people is we have a just different way of communicating. And so we're expected to come all the way over here and communicate the way neurotypical people do. And that's part of that masking that we do. But there's a huge amount of effort and work that goes into that. And I think to be really inclusive and supportive, treat it more like cross-cultural communication, where if neurotypical people learn more about how autistic people communicate and sort of met us in the middle, I think that would go a long way towards creating more inclusive and supportive environments because it's not us doing all the work anymore. If you're going to get involved with organizations, I really strongly encourage you to research organizations and go for the ones that actually center autistic people. Like if there's no autistic people on staff or on the board, I would be a little bit like wary of that organization. And branch out beyond autism. Like just advocacy in general for the disability community is something that is just so desperately needed. And when it comes to like support, like in schools, gosh, we need funding. We need funding so bad. We need better support in public schools. We need more accessible resources for adults. Like getting an autism evaluation is not cheap and it's not always covered by insurance. And a lot of people just can't afford it. And so there's a lot of people out there that need support, need help, and they're not getting it because they just can't even like that's the first barrier they encounter. So that's where, as an ally, I think advocacy work could be really helpful, advocating for that funding for diagnostics, funding for support, for therapy, like all of the things that autistic people need. There's a lot of great orgs out there. And I think another part of this question was just about how can allies push back on misinformation? I think that goes back to the very beginning with the learning. The more you know, the more you learn about it, the less easy it is for you to get like distracted by misinformation, and you can actually more easily counter it because you know the facts. But I definitely want to hear what everybody else has to say about this.
I was just going to add to it. It's really important to make sure, as you were saying, kind of knowing where to get diagnosed. Is starting with some of your local health centers, your local health department, especially when we're talking about our younger kids, getting that initial diagnosis, and through our public schools. Yes, they are severely underfunded, but that is a resource, especially if resources are tight for families, to utilize the public school system to try to get that initial uh, assessment. I know here in our public school system, I kind of went two different routes for both of my boys. So I was able to go through the public school system for one to get the diagnosis, and then the other one we went through a more of a private, just to kind of see the difference between the two. And I thought both of them were really good. I love the way you said really centering the needs of the autistic community. Just as you said, if they are not at the table, you really want to kind of think long and hard about being a part or joining that organization. We are really, here in North Carolina, we have intellectual and developmental disabilities, kind of like what is it called? I'm losing my words, forgive me, but it's part of our legislature. So there is like an IDD caucus, that's what it is, with our legislature, where like I think 2 or 3 times throughout the year, we all convene and we go up there, and it's a listening session that we're able to go and hear the needs of the community. And it's really, again, hearing from the community to really make sure that they are putting together legislation that is centering the needs of the community. So yeah, I think the points that you mentioned were great.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I've got a point here. So when we talk about true inclusion, this is sort of like my soapbox of the moment. Back to what Adrienne was saying, we spend a lot of time teaching autistic individuals to reflect neuronormative practices, but we do next to nothing about teaching our neuronormative individuals to communicate with our autistic or otherwise neurodivergent individuals. So this can start super young, right? We start talking about total communication, that folks can communicate with AAC devices, that they can communicate via sign, they can use gestures, they can use scripting and echolalia. All of those are valid ways of expressing themselves. Having verbal speech does not make someone more human, right? So like that's one piece of it. The other piece in all of this around true inclusion is we know right now that the gaps in services are getting wider, that we know that the policies are really lagging behind what the needs are in the community, and the financial barriers are steep. If you look in the comments, there are tons of folks just talking about how they paid thousands and thousands of dollars for evaluations. We just paid $2,500 for an evaluation that was partially covered by insurance. So, just even thinking about what that's like. And the isolation can be so real. So when we start thinking about true inclusion, I start thinking about mutual aid and what are the pieces that we can do as allies, as members of the community, to sort of bring people together to share resources, to share knowledge, to be able to support outside of those formal systems. And that can really look like things like community funds to cover sensory equipment or communication devices or peer-to-peer mentoring or just knowledge sharing networks, right? The more we know, the more we start to break down stigma and the more that we start to really support people in strategies to be able to advocate for themselves. And then the biggest thing when I think about inclusion is really about amplifying the voices of the community, right? So we are all here because we hold some level of privilege, right? Yep. And so if we can use our platforms to amplify the work that other people are doing within the community, right? The autistic folks that aren't necessarily getting the attention, all the folks that we talked about that are being left out of the conversation. That's one of the pieces that we can do to really support true inclusion. I could do this all day, so I'll be quiet now.
Well, one of the questions that has come up in a couple of different places, and we've touched on it a little bit. I know that you have said, a couple of you have said, advocating for more dollars and all of that. But if someone really is needing to get tested right now and they're an adult, is there any place they can go if they don't have the, financial means to pay for that? Is there any place that is, or any organization that is helping, folks get tested?
This can be tricky because it's sort of state specific, because a lot of times testing is related to what license you're holding and what state you're licensed in. So I think it's difficult to be able to say, is there one organization that provides that?
Gotcha.
If anyone else has another answer.
Is there a place where folks can start to look?
Here in North Carolina, I know now the wait list, that's always going to be a problem, right? But here in North Carolina, there is Teach. And then if you reach out to what is it? Your psychologist and your psychiatrist, sometimes they're able to do a referral, is what I've been told through the Autism Society. So here in North Carolina, Autism Society can kind of do a referral and give people referral lists, and then Teach.
I was thinking about the inclusion question earlier, so I was trying to like gather like all my thoughts together, and everybody made like really good points about it. I just feel like, I guess, true inclusion would mean like not just access, but belonging. They should feel welcome. They should feel valued. They should be seen as, whole humans with gifts and needs and dignity. Designing environments around them and not forcing them to fit into them. Sensory friendly spaces and adaptive communication supports, or trained staff, even having communities that are prepared to support non-speakers without treating them as burdens. Having support that's consistent and sustainable. True inclusion to me would mean that our families aren't left to piece together different services or burn themselves out doing so because our systems are so underfunded or gutted. So, I mean, it means like their Medicaid, the special education, therapies, respite, community programs, like all of those are not properly funded. They're not protected. And they're usually the first things to go within budget cuts. Having representation that includes their reality. There, I think this was a big one for me because it's hard for people to tell of the struggles that I've had. They meet the today Tiff and they don't know the Tiff that took all here. So I was diagnosed before I had kids. And then I was in ABA therapy and I did speech therapy and I did like a whole bunch of work that I took to get here to this. But raising a child who is a non-speaker, who has apraxia, dyspraxia, can't control his body, and raising another child who is more like me. So I'm getting to see I get to see all the different sides of autism advocacy and autistic advocacy. And one of the things that I do notice a lot of, and is that our advocacy is dominated by those who are motor privileged, those who can speak, those who can do a lot of the things that my son cannot do. And I think that if we wanted to have true inclusion, I think that that would mean that we have to reach out to those parents of those that have children like my oldest. I'm still in those groups. I'm still in, the severe autism groups or I'm still in those groups. I'm in every single one of them. I don't post. I just read. I want to see where they're at, what they're thinking, what are they needing. Largely, a lot of them feel like they're drowning, they're overwhelmed, that they go into a group and they say, oh, my husband's had his fourth concussion because our son had this meltdown, and all they get was someone pointed out that they were wearing an Autism Speak shirt. And I'm like, they just said the husband got knocked out.
Yeah.
3 times.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the 4th one. I don't think he could take any more hits to his head. And so it's like, I feel like we have to reach those parents and those families, because right now it's too easy for them to run into the arms of a Robert F. Kennedy. Like right now, it feels like they're saying all the good things, Trump and Tylenol. All they have to do is mention autism. And like so many groups I've been in, it's, well, at least they're saying something about it for our families. And like they're running straight into it because they're feeling like a lot of autism spaces aren't hearing them or aren't seeing what they're having. They're dealing with um, elopement, self-injurious behaviors, getting kicked out of school, calls every day, families on the brink of losing their jobs because their jobs won't let them keep going to school to keep picking up their child. They're going through that. There's not a lot of therapy services. There's not a lot of help. And they're feeling isolated. Like Sarah was saying, like the isolation can be so much. I'm in Texas. It's a resource desert. The whole state is horrible. And we've moved everywhere around in the state. And we have lived in areas where we had access to nothing, literally nothing. And there are so many families that are in the same way. They can't afford to move somewhere where there is more resources. They don't have the best insurance. They don't have the best coverage, either underinsured or not insured. And so I think the best way that if we are going to advocate for inclusion and stuff, I definitely feel like it's going to need all of the things that everybody on the panel has said, and then also including outreach to the parents and, telling them, okay, we do hear you. We do get you. We're seeing this. We get you. And finding ways to help them. Because when they're burnt out and when they're exhausted and when they're scared, a lot of what they say and do, it comes from fear and being scared and not knowing what to do when they're gone. And, but some of them could word that stuff a bit better though. Like, it's like you don't want them to go dig into like, oh, it's destroying lives. So you don't want to go that far and stuff. But I do feel like we have to find a way to reach them and in some type of way, so that we don't see them lining up and taking everything that this administration says as gold, because that's just harmful and it hurts. And right now they're not realizing that what this administration is doing is not going to help their children, like at all. They're offering causes and cures and but they're cutting Medicaid, they're cutting special education, they're cutting, so on when I'm like, what are they? They're not actually helping. They're not helping our families. And so reaching out to them, telling them that we understand them and that we get it, but there's also a way to articulate that autism can be challenging and hard at times without dehumanizing our kids. And that's one of the biggest things um that I see a lot of. Like, you can talk about, the complex needs that, your child or your loved one has without describing them as burdens or destroying your life and their life, because they hear those things and they internalize those things. And you don't want them to grow up thinking those things about themselves.
I would imagine that there might be some folks here on the call who think that maybe they want to be an ally, but they don't know what autism is, for sure. What are some signs that, folks can be, looking at in themselves or in their children, or they might suspect that they are, or suspect that their kid is, but they don't know for sure and they don't have the means? What are some things that folks can do to, you know, begin to even understand completely what we're all talking about? Because when somebody said that it is not a line, a straight line, that really kind of struck me, because that's what we're always told. There's a spectrum, and spectrums are not straight lines as a rule, I don't think, but but that's the way it's always described. There's a side here and a side here, and then there's all these little, places in between. And so, I love the color wheel idea, the pie chart, or I like that a lot better, in terms of thinking of that. But what can folks be, looking for, or looking at, if they're suspecting their child may need some extra services because they have that?
So this isn't a pretty answer, but my recommendation would be to go and look up the DSM and look at the criteria and see if it fits. I'm not advocating for you to diagnose yourself or diagnose your child, but at least looking at what your doctor will be looking at can help give you an idea. And me, I'm a graph person. I like to see, okay, this is, oh, this. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to meet all of the criteria. It may mean they meet some. It may mean that, oh, I might need to look into this. But I think that at least gives you an idea from a clinical standpoint of what they're looking for, because there is a lot of misinformation online. And especially when we get into late diagnosed autism, something that we don't talk about a lot is that trauma can also present as neurodivergence. And so sometimes, because people have gone through trauma as children from being undiagnosed, the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. Okay. Diagnostic Statistics Manual. So it's what they have to use in order to diagnose and treat you when you come into the office. That's how insurance is paid. I have to say that as well, because all of these things are connected and important. So that's how they determine it. So if you look at that, you can at least begin to see, like, oh, okay, because you might even be surprised. I know for me, and when I went to go and look at it, I said, oh, that's considered autism? Oh, well, I didn't realize that was an autistic trait that I was showing, but okay, now I see. So it'll just help and at least be a good starting point, so that you're not getting overwhelmed by information, because there is so much out there and there's so many personal experiences, but they are personal experiences.
Yes, the DSM is what folks need to use, what providers need to use in order to provide an autism diagnosis. So remember, there's a diagnosis, but then there's also this idea of identification, right? So when we're looking at understanding what an autism diagnosis looks like, we're often looking at things like differences in social interactions. We're looking at differences in speech development. We're looking at differences in sensory sensitivities, emotional regulation. We're looking at differences in interests. So these are all, and notice I keep saying differences. So the DSM is going to specifically say deficits or delays, because the DSM, and Dr. Chelsea, I'm sure that we have our issues in the disciplines with the DSM, but it looks at it solely through this deficit label. So when you look at it, I don't want anyone to suddenly become alarmed at, oh my goodness, there are all these things wrong with me. What providers are really looking for are things that appear different than what is sort of expected in a normative focused society. Again, not saying any of those things are right, but those are some of the things that we're looking for. So do we have what folks consider repetitive behaviors? Do we have different ways of communicating with one another? Do we have differences in executive functioning? Right? All of those can lead to an autism diagnosis. And in the DSM, they're outlined as deficits in or delays in. So it's just important to kind of keep, those pieces in mind, because the DSM is what folks are going to look for when you're talking about that. So, you have to hit a certain number in order to meet a diagnosis. But that doesn't mean that you don't see yourself in that same way, in that same neurodivergent way.
I like this question. What gives you hope right now for the autistic community?
What gives me hope right now is connecting with other autistic people. It's been really helpful for me to just have that community, and to share experiences and to learn from one another. I also, it gives me hope that people are willing to come on a national call like this and talk about it, because I think when you feel like the administration is targeting you, there's that tendency to want to hide, especially as an autistic person who masks. Like, there's that natural reflex to hide and to be public, and to have people willing to come out and talk about it in a national forum like this. That gives me hope, because I think this is the kind of thing where, like, being out in the light and being open is actually the thing that's most likely to protect us.
Hearing more and learning more from our self-advocates, seeing the number of resources that we have. Now there are more that is needed, right? Especially for our adult population. But from where it was back 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, to where we are today, I'm just very hopeful. I would also say seeing more families of color, Tiffany, Dr. Chelsea, here talking. And as you said, Dr. Sarah, where it was one time just white boys, where it's all you were hearing about it, but we knew that it was in our Black and our brown communities, but it was being described as behavioral disorders, right? Or all these other classifications, aggression, all of this, these, very hurtful and harmful terms used to describe our Black and brown population, to now seeing more faces within the communities of color, hearing these stories, learning from them to be able to represent my boys, my family. That's what gives me hope.
For me, it is sitting as a Black woman on this panel and being able to have a space to talk about what autism has meant for me, for both of my twin daughters, to really actually see what it looks like beyond what the DSM or what psychology has told us. I always tell people, I'm like, my whole life, right? Oh, you're ghetto, you're loud, you're aggressive, as Tracy spoke to, like you're this, you're that. Well, maybe, but I'm also autistic, and that also deserves to be acknowledged, right? And so to actually be invited to talk, to have space to talk, and especially from what people would consider me a low needs autistic, because they don't see the invisible things that happen in my life. They don't see the $100,000 job losses, right, that I've had. They don't see my daughter suicide attempts. They don't see any of that. They don't see the years of speech therapy, right, and auditory therapy for hearing. So they don't see those things. And so to be able to have a space to talk about it, to be invited to talk about it, lets me know that we are moving in the right direction. And I'm just going to drop, I always like to drop a receipt anytime that I say something. The APA did come out with an apology to acknowledge the fact that persons of color have been left out of a lot of these psychological studies across the years. So if anyone does need solid proof of like, oh no, we're not just making this up, a lot of these criteria do not include Black and brown people, and we are often overlooked. So I just wanted to include that in there just as a small receipt. They apologize. They're working on it, y'all, but we have a long way to go, and I think this is a good step in the right direction.
I guess what gives me hope is the people. It's like everything else that everybody else said, but like the people. I remember I felt like I was diagnosed eons ago. But but the community has changed like so much in the course of like when I was diagnosed, there was like no social media, no like connection with people from across the country or
Mhm.
even in your state or anywhere. So it's just been, and I know that it always seems like there's this like divide that we don't feel like we're ever gonna like overcome. But this community really has made some progress. Like it's I've been able to witness like parents who, felt like they were like collapsing under the weight of there's no services, and then they just roll up their sleeves and they create something. They Everything that I know about advocacy was from was a mom and a dad couple team that created courses and said, come, let's do it online. And then we did it in person. Everything that I know that I taught my son by myself to use his iPad, I learned from another parent because every single speech therapist that we tried, my son is 18, he's had 3 speech therapists his entire life. And it wasn't because we didn't try to get one, it was because they said that his needs were beyond their skill set. They felt like they couldn't help him. So I had to learn how to do that on my own. And I was taught by other parents. So it was like parents helping parents and seeing, that they were filling in the gaps, in these services and these holes that we have. It's, seeing so many like autistic adults that are like raising their voices and they're, showing us what acceptance really looks like and should look like. Um, and demanding dignity and it's just like that was something else I didn't have kind of like growing up is I didn't see anyone else. When I was diagnosed, I thought I just had like an extreme form of anxiety. Like I didn't know nothing about what I was diagnosed with Asperger's when it was a thing. And I just thought, oh man, even my anxiety is so severe. It has a weird name. And I nothing I had no community. I had no connection to other people. So this, like having so many people around the world that you can talk to and you can connect with. And I didn't understand autism really when I was diagnosed. And I definitely didn't understand it in Black people. And then when I first came online, it's hardly any Black people. And now there's like a lot more. And so now I can have like, this connection, you know, with them as well. And that's what gives me hope is the community, the way the parents teach parents and the way the autistic people are standing up for themselves and for the community and for other children so they don't have to go through what they went through. And I think that's kind of what really gives me hope. And also history gives me hope too. It's just seeing like my grandma also taught me everything I know about advocacy and stuff. She growing up in Alabama in the 60s and stuff, civil rights, all that stuff. She's taught me so much. It taught me that they fought so much for their rights and their dignity in a world that didn't want to give them either. So it's just the people. Even though sometimes we seem divided at times, it's just we've come a long way. And we got a long way to go, but we've come a long way. It's like, and I think it's just the people. And that gives me hope. And all of y'all on the panel and whoever came. everybody, everybody that's here. That gives me hope.
What gives me hope is exactly what folks are saying, is that autistic people are really leading this conversation and more people are listening, right? And so just so folks can just sort of to reiterate some of this is that autistic people are leading the conversation, not because they were invited to the conversation, but because they had to forge their own path into it, right? And so that's part of what gives me hope, is that you have a community of people here that are really, building increased visibility and increased advocacy and increased protection for one another, right? So that gives me hope. And then from sort of this like other professional lens, the other thing that gives me hope is that we are seeing way more research that is coming out by autistic researchers, right, about impacts in people's everyday lives. So we're seeing more about masking and burnout. And we're seeing that research being done now by autistic researchers with autistic people. So not for, not on, but with that community. So, from that perspective, that tells me that some of that advocacy has really pushed into the academic realm, which doesn't happen easily, right? But we're seeing lots more folks being able to do that and publish that information for more folks to really understand it. And that gives me hope.
I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to get final thoughts in a minute, but I did want to share that if you get on the Red Wine and Blue app and you want to talk to Adrienne, because there were some folks who put in some things that were like very specific that they had some questions on, they just don't have time for to get to tonight. You can message Adrienne within the app. But Dr. Sarah, I think you're putting your information in the chat as well. If someone would like to reach out to her, she's also offered to, help guide those who had individual questions to help you find the resources that you need. So with that, I want to ask if there are any final thoughts. This has been a great panel and very informative, and making me think a lot about my children's upbringing. My children are all adults too, but some of the hiccups and bumps that we went through, just makes me wonder. And they, are older, so the diagnosing wasn't going on then. They're probably, my kids are you guys' age on this panel, so that's so some of you who mentioned that you didn't have resources when you were younger. This has been very eye-opening. But any final thoughts?
Yeah, this has been an incredible opportunity. I'm so thankful that I was able to join the panel. Just again, being in this space to be able to hear from other women and self-advocates. So thank you for this opportunity.
I just want to say thank you. This was really great. It was awesome talking with everybody, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I don't know how many parents are on here, but I just wanted to leave like some stuff with the parents. I just wanted to say that even on your hardest days, you're not alone, and that there are others fighting, building, creating, and refusing to accept any scraps right alongside you. The systems may be broken. The work may feel endless, but every act of advocacy, big or small, ripples outward. Your child's life has value. Your fight has purpose, and your voice matters more than you know. You're not alone. We might not have all the answers. I know I don't. But we have each other, and we have the power to keep showing up. And sometimes that's where the change begins. So keep going. Take rest if you need to, but keep going. Because giving up's not an option. Not for yourself, not for your kids. So rest and know that the fight will be there tomorrow, and that there'll be some people to help you pick it up when you're resting, and then just come back to it. But you're not alone, and I'm happy to be here and talking with everybody.
Number one, I totally am. I've said this all along, that I'm fangirling here over the most incredibly intelligent humans that I've come across. And I've been saying that for days now. So I really appreciate, this kid from Florida, this first generation, child of immigrant kids from this tiny little community in Massachusetts being able to be here. But then when we think about, just what Tiffany just said so eloquently, that I will not be able to repeat, is that the systems are broken, but our kids are not, our families are not, we are not, right? So just because those are broken doesn't mean that we cannot choose affirmation, that we cannot choose advocacy, right in our own homes and in our little corners of the world, because that piece is really where the difference is made, right? And we're leading those pieces with dignity. And that for me is a future that I think we're working towards. And it's one that I think that that's worth believing in. So that stuff might be broken, but the rest of us are not.
I just want to thank my fellow panelists. You guys are all amazing. And I want to thank everyone who joined us here tonight, and especially the people who asked questions, because I think asking questions can feel really vulnerable. It means admitting that you don't know something. And so I really appreciate you all taking that step and asking questions. And please keep doing that. Like, don't stop asking questions after this event is over. Keep asking, reach out to any of us on social media, wherever you can get a hold of us, ask other autism experts, because that's how we keep learning and growing. So I appreciate you all. Thank you.
All right. Well, good night, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. And thank you to this wonderful panel. It was fantastic. Thank you.